their assets are equal to more than a third of all the goods and services bought and sold in the United States in a year, and they did this by counterfeiting currency into existence and just typing it and buying something. Hi everyone, this is GDP. In other words, it's the economy. It's the amount of goods and services bought and sold over the period of a year in the United States. And so in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to try and figure out how much of the U.S. economy does the Federal Reserve own? How much were they able to counterfeit currency into existence by just typing it and then buy? So this is the GDP, and then this is the GDP is the red line, and the scale is on the left, and total public debt, the amount that we owe, you and me, the amount that we owe is on the right. And you'll notice these scales are different. One tops out at 36 trillion, one tops out at 24 trillion. I can't correct for this on the Fed's website. So you're just going to have to imagine that 28 trillion, which is the blue line, is actually a lot higher than 22 trillion, which is the red line. So our economy is 22.7 trillion, and the amount that we owe is 28.5 trillion. So moving on, I'm going to take those two, and we're going to figure out debt to GDP here. Well, here's general government gross debt for the United States. The way the Federal Reserve publishes it is as a percent of fiscal year GDP. And you know what's interesting is this chart goes out to the year 2026. Well, I took a look at the notations under this chart, and this is data and projections supplied by the IMF and the World Bank. So we're going to not even bother with this, actually. Here is gross federal debt as a percentage of gross domestic product. This is one that you've probably seen before. A lot of people use this. It's annual data. Now, the fiscal year for the U.S. government ends September 30. So they've had 2020 data available for a long time. This was updated July 29th of 2021. So it should include 2020, and it doesn't. It goes to 2019, where we were at 106% of GDP as far as the national debt goes. You'll notice that it's bending over and sort of going flat and not increasing that much. But because it only goes to 2019, I decided, well, let me see if I can make my own chart on that. The data doesn't go back as far. The data is going to start on the next chart at 1966. So you'll notice it's going down until 1981, and then it goes up into the 90s, and then down to the year 2000 and the NASDAQ crash, and then it goes up again. So this is the next chart. This is that portion of it, down from 1966 to 81, and then that bump up, and then holy smokes, look at that, 136% of GDP. And this is quarterly data. So, but it's averaged to what it would be annually if the quarter kept up at that same rate. Next, I want to go to Federal Reserve assets. This is their total assets, and it's the level on Wednesday, so the specific level. Now, how do they acquire these assets? How does the Federal Reserve get those assets? Well, they type $1 trillion into existence and they buy something. What do they usually buy? They usually buy federal debt. That's the vast majority. There's some mortgage-backed securities, and then there's some other stuff. So they buy the future. You got to look at what federal debt is. When somebody buys federal debt, they're buying your future tax payments. You're paying taxes, that goes to the Treasury. The Treasury pays off. They're basically rolling over. I think the average length of federal debt now is less than 4 years. It used to be like 4.25 years. or maybe it was 4.5 years. I can't remember. But it is, there's 30-year treasuries and there's 3-month treasuries. So the average, they're paying off whatever they owe in the future, but then they're selling enough to cover whatever they've paid off plus more so that they can go deeper, so they can put us deeper in debt. It's you and it's me. Never forget that. You're the one stuck with the tab. And so we're at 8.35 trillion that they just typed into existence, and they bought stuff. So let's look at the constitutionality of what they are doing, and never mind the morality. But Congress shall have the power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, and so Congress authorized them to counterfeit. They are Congress-sanctioned bank, and it's a private bank with stockholders. They get paid an annual dividend of 6%. And so here, again, this is federal debt held by the Federal Reserve banks. And so this is the amount that we owe them out of our tax payments. So this strips out mortgage-backed securities and the other things. And so currently, we owe them $5.644 trillion of our taxes goes to the bonds that the Federal Reserve, the principal and interest, the payoff on these bonds that the Federal Reserve bought by typing currency into existence and buying these bonds. So, central bank assets to GDP for the United States. You find this on the Fed's website. It is also created from IMF, International Monetary Fund, and World Bank estimates. And so it's showing that it peaked at 23%. It used to be under 6%, peaked at 23%. But the end date here is 2017. And so this hasn't been updated for quite a while. This is 2021. So let's make our own charts here. Let's take the assets. There's the assets, and you can see the shape of them. Here, I've done the assets, but this chart goes back a long time further, back to 1950. Actually, what was that? 47. I love long-term charts. But here we've got these two overlaid. Notice that the scales are different. This one tops at 9 trillion, and that is the assets, which are at 8-point-something trillion. This one tops at 27 trillion, and that is the GDP, which tops out at 22-point-something trillion. I'm going to change the scale here just to show this stuff where we've got both sets of data and how it lines up, because it, like I said, it auto scales. And so here, it's interesting. Now they scale so that they almost line up perfectly. But again, the domestic product, 22.7 trillion, and Fed assets at 8. So you have to adjust this in your mind, lift the gross domestic product up much higher. But if we go to total assets divided by gross domestic product and then divided by 10, the reason for dividing it by 10 is to get it to read out as a percentage. And so the Federal Reserve actually owned a little bit more than 6% of the economy. A couple years in here where they own a little bit less than 6%, but about 6% of the economy. And then we get to the crisis of 2008. We got 14% of the economy, and then 18% of the economy. And then it peaks out at 25% of the economy. The economy continues to grow, and then they start doing tapering. So they're reducing the size of their asset portfolio to 17% of the economy. In 2019, something went wrong, and they start creating currency at a rate faster than the economy is growing, and they own a larger percentage. And then along comes the crisis, the pandemic, and never let a good crisis go to waste. So they typed up a whole bunch of currency and bought 34.6% of the economy. Right now they own 34.75% of the their assets are equal to more than a third of all the goods and services bought and sold in the United States in a year, and they did this by counterfeiting currency into existence and just typing it and buying something. You know, I'm a big Sinatra fan. I've been to see him more than a dozen times. And there's this song that he used to sing, "Nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try." And the Federal Reserve got it. I want to thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.